Welcome to Bruce Hurwitz Presents Meet the Experts. I'm your host, Bruce Hurwitz of Hurwitz Strategic Staffing. You can find us on the web at hsstaffing.com. I hope you'll consider us for all your staffing, career counseling, and speech writing needs. I am delighted to be joined today by Mel Schwartz. We'll be discussing getting unstuck, embracing uncertainty to empower your change process. Meet the Experts is sponsored by PK-CPAs. P&K is a full-service accounting firm. They provide accounting and consulting services to businesses ranging from startups to small and mid-cap companies to nonprofits as well as high-net-worth individuals. Contact them today for a free consultation at pk-cpas.com or call them at 973-882-8810. They will be happy to be of service. Mel, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bruce. Looking forward to chatting with you today.
As I am with you. Please take a few moments and introduce yourself to our viewers.
I have been practicing psychotherapy, executive coaching, writing books, coming to understand the transformative process and experience, the change process, which is our topic for today, for over 25 years. I've lived it, I've studied it, I've read it. It's what excites me, and I assume it's what I'm going to be sharing with you and your audience today.
Well, thank you for that. So let's get started. What is the fear, flight, fright response? And how important is it? And how much trouble does it cause us? And how do we get over it?
Well, let's look at the fear part first, because the fear is the most substantial part. What is fear? Fear occurs other than physical fear. You're out hiking on the trail and you think you hear a bear. All right, that's fear, that's understandable. But in our lives, fear is due to our thought attaching to something that provokes anxiety and distress. It's our thoughts' attachment to something that produces fear, sometimes warranted, more often unwarranted. Now, in my work, I've come to see that often it's our attachment and our need for certainty that produces fear. Why? We seek certainty. Some people are addicted to certainty, but reality is altogether uncertain. We want to know the future and the unknown, but it's unknowable. So for many of us, we get stuck because we start to calculate and deliberate what that future looks like. And again, it's unknowable. This, I believe, is the primary cause of anxiety and distress and fear. So what I propose, and I've recently given the TEDx talk on this, is that we need to do the opposite. We need to welcome uncertainty and embrace uncertainty. That's what allows us to ride the waves of change. In my new book, The Possibility Principle, I suggest that uncertainty equals possibility. Why wouldn't I want to bring on uncertainty? You see, as a culture, the word uncertain provokes a negativity. The future looks uncertain. Why do we make that a negative? If the present isn't that good, then uncertain actually should be seen as positive. We need to begin to reframe things. So anytime you're feeling, coming back to your question, Bruce, anytime we're feeling fear, we want to take off and flee, we need to do the opposite. You know, whatever we're afraid of, if we go like this to it, it makes the fear more formidable. If we do the opposite again, the paradox, and invite in what we're afraid of, the fear dissipates. I've done this many times in my life and assisted others, which is, all right, let's take a look at what we're afraid of. Let's welcome it in. It's not such a big, bad enemy. Then the fear can dissipate.
This is rather ironic, and I'm smiling because yesterday I gave a workshop at the public library on overcoming fear, writing speeches, and delivering speeches. Because, as you know, most people are scared to death of public speaking. And one thing that shocked me when I learned this years ago is that for some people, one-on-one, just a sales call, is the same for them as somebody who has to get up and speak in front of 1,000 people. Makes no difference. And in my research, I came across Spinoza. And Spinoza wrote something very interesting, that reason and rationality overcome emotions. So if you can look at something rationally, you can get over the emotion, and then in my case, you can get up and make a speech. In the case of your clients, whatever it is. How do you, because this was the number one question I was asked, so I'll ask it to you. How do you overcome, in my case yesterday, it's the fear of public speaking. In your case, it could be anything else. How do you actually, what are the practical steps you can take to overcome the fear so that the part of your brain that you want to control the circumstances, the rational part of the brain, takes over from the fear, flight, fright part?
That's a great question, and it opens to many considerations. I'll address a couple of them. From my experience, rational intervention by itself often isn't sufficient to overcome fear. Notwithstanding Spinoza's missive, fear is an enormous avalanche of distress, which makes the rational mind retreat. So let's go to public speaking. I was giving a talk about overcoming fear to a large audience, and I was taking questions. And an elderly woman in the audience raised her hand, and she said, rather meekly, I have a fear of public speaking. How do I overcome that? So I went down, greeted her, and brought her up to the podium and put her behind the microphone. And I said, now could you repeat that so everyone can hear you? And she said, I have a fear of public speaking. I let a moment or two pass. She's still there. And I said, how do you feel now? She said, somewhat better. Of course, because you shared your fear. As a culture, we are taught to avoid sharing insecurities or weaknesses. We need to act strong. Well, acting strong is weak because we're acting. I've learned that when we can embrace an insecurity or vulnerability and not hide it, as that woman did by my bringing her up to the microphone, she realized she was okay, because a fear like that is the fear of, what do I think the other will think of me, whether it's the sales call or the public speaking. Now, in the one-on-one sales call, of course, it's not going to make a lot of sense to say to the person you're talking to, boy, this makes me anxious to talk to you. Yeah. So that would be a different circumstance. But to get to the root of the fear, we need to reframe what we're afraid of. In that case, what we're afraid of is not just the lack of success, but it's the fear of what I think someone else will think of me. That's at the core of our difficulty as a culture, because that's the opposite of authentic self-esteem. That's what I call other esteem, this intimidation that I'm going to be judged by others. And that incites a lot of fear.
Now, how does this relate to change? Because just to remind our viewers that our topic is getting unstuck, embracing uncertainty to empower your change process. And it is, as you know, one of the most difficult things to get people to embrace change. Every fear in the book comes into play.
So change, once again, comes from a number of things. If we are going to avoid uncertainty, then we're going to struggle with change. I created a visualization once in a session with a woman I was working with. She was very unhappily married, but had no children, was financially independent. Marriage counseling hadn't worked for her and her husband. And I asked, why do you remain married? And she said, I don't know who I would be as a divorced person. There it was, the fear of the unknown. I said, well, I used a rational mind. Well, it might be a lot better than feeling trapped and imprisoned. What gets in the way? the fear of the unknown. So I created a visualization for her. I asked her to close her eyes and envision walking into a stream, what's called a river. And I said, now let's imagine that the current of the river is the equivalent of the flow of your life. Walk into the river and join in the current. So you're in movement, flow, embracing change. A moment or two passed, and I asked her where she saw herself standing. And she said, I got into the river, but I grabbed a hold of a boulder to hold myself back. And I said, why? And she said, the river bends to the right up ahead, and I can't see where it's going. And that's the future. I said, you're not supposed to know where it's going. It's your future. Now, if you let go of the rock and join in the current, you're free to navigate as you go along. You see, that's a different worldview. That worldview allows us to navigate our future. But you know what, Bruce? Let's look at our language. I'm preparing a new TEDx talk around language. In every other sentence we speak, there are 8 words we use that serve to keep us stuck and avoiding change. You know what those words are?
Never a clue.
Am, is, are, be. To be verbs, unlike other verbs, are inert. They're static. They're not moving. So if my thoughts sound like I am, you are, those are fixed, inert, and unmoving. This is a primary reason why we struggle with change, because our thoughts are rooted in these words, which come from 17th century thinking. So I teach people to think differently and communicate differently without using those static inert verbs, which free us up. During a seminar I was teaching once, somebody's talking about his career. And I asked, what do you think of yourself in your career? And he said, I'm a loser. I haven't won. Now there was the word am. I said, now say that without using a to be verb. And he said, I feel like a loser, but his face lightened up. I said, what's the difference? He said, I am a loser. That doesn't change. I feel like a loser. I guess how I feel could change. Now we started on the change process. So it's 2 things. Avoiding uncertainty. So you're living your life like you're playing a chess match. You're sitting back, you're calculating, you're analyzing, but you're not in the flow. You're not apprehending your intuitive wisdom. And 2, look at your thoughts and the words you're using. Those 2, anything that's keeping you stuck in your life and you're struggling with your change process, look at the thought. It has a to be verb in it. Now change that thought, eliminate the to be verb, and you're on your way.
Thank you for that. One of the things that excited me was the title of your book, The Possibility Principle: How Quantum Physics Can Improve the Way You Think, Live, and Love. I like quantum physics. I readily admit I don't get it, but I at least know that I don't know what I don't know. So when I talk about quantum physics, I hopefully don't sound as ignorant as I am, if that makes sense.
Instead of as I am, I want to say as I feel.
As I feel. And I feel pretty ignorant if I get in too deep, because then I know that I'm drowning. It's like one of my favorite lines is, if you're crazy and you know it, you're okay. If you're crazy and you don't know it, then you've got a problem. Talk to us, and I'm smiling also because one of the stories I like to tell, and I'm not going to do it now because I don't want to take up your time, is about Max Planck and an incident that's supposed to have happened with his chauffeur when his chauffeur got fed up with listening to the same speech over and over again. So he delivered Max Planck's speech, which probably never happened, but again, that's not our story. What is quantum physics, and how is it related to this topic?
Quantum physics is the study of quantum matter. Matter that until the early 20th century was unavailable to us because we didn't have the technology to see it. So simply put, It's the study of the quantum world, which we have found, to our amazement, operates under an entirely different set of rules, arguably doesn't even operate under a set of rules, than what we think reality to be. It caused Einstein great consternation. As genius and revolutionary as he was, he resisted some of the messages of quantum physics. Now, in particular, and by the way, I was a C student in science at best. But when I read quantum physics, it excites me. And what excites me is I don't read the math or the formulas. There are a couple of simple principles of quantum physics that have changed my life, sourced the writing of my books, and facilitate my work with people on many areas, one in particular for today, the change process. So we were taught as kids, and have been taught since the 17th century, what's called Newtonian determinism. Newton told us if we had enough information, today we call it data, we could reasonably predict the future. Now, that allowed us great progress in life. But as we discussed earlier, when we become addicted to certainty and predictability, we stall out, we suffer epidemics of anxiety and fear. We go overboard. In 1927, quantum physicist, German, Werner Heisenberg, studies the quantum material. And he finds that he cannot know at the same time both the location and the momentum of a particle, that he had actually intruded into its reality. He was impacting it. And the takeaway is what is called the uncertainty principle. The uncertainty principle is total predictability does not exist. It is not how reality operates on the quantum level. We are coming to see increasingly the same is true, or even more true, on our macro level. So predictability is not in alignment with human well-being. Now, I looked at uncertainty and thought, well, addiction to certainty is so much a part of our problem. Let's look at our relationships. Oscar Wilde said uncertainty is the essence of romance. If you think about it, it makes sense. Falling in love is full of uncertainty. But what do we do in our relationships, romantic relationships? We secure them and we make them predictable. And then we say passion dies. It's for a reason. It's because we got addicted to certainty and predictability. Our thoughts get addicted to predictability. So what I have done is I've devised a method for our thoughts to release certainty, which is where growth comes from and the change process comes from. So embracing uncertainty is part of the quantum reality, and I find that it generates productivity and growth. It allows us to release fear and anxiety. The other principle of quantum physics that I employ is inseparability. Just as the mystics and New Age pundits have always said that reality is inseparable. It's one inseparable whole. The great psychiatrist Carl Jung spoke of unus mundus, one world. Astoundingly, quantum physics has found the same reality. Everything really is as one inseparable, interconnected whole. So what does that mean to us? Well, when we operate from that premise, compassion and empathy become ordinary. Because if everything is as one, you are connected to me. Your well-being washes back over and impacts me. So instead of a world where we are driven with extreme individualism and greed and loss of empathy and compassion, which we experience everywhere we look, the inseparability principle allows relationships to foster and a sense of kindred spirit to occur. Now, I know these are just words right now, and it would require some understanding, well, how does that work? We don't have time for that today, but it does work. I have a podcast called the Possibility Podcast, in which every week we explore different facets of this. And of course, my book, The Possibility Principle, speaks at length as to how these principles help us overcome anxiety and depression and fear, how we can thrive in our relationships and communication. By the way, going back to those to be verbs, stuck verbs,
Yes.
those are Newtonian. In the quantum realm, those verbs wouldn't make any sense.
When I am talking about quantum physics, I do it a little differently. And the first thing I tell people is that we're talking about the micro world, the invisible. It's so small, you can't see it, and the rules of the game are totally changed. And what fascinates me the most is that we always say we can't be in two places at the same time. In the quantum world, you can be in two places at the same time. And when I throw that out, I get into trouble because somebody will always invariably be extremely rude and raise their hand and say, wait a minute, how can one atom be in two different places at the same time? Which is a logical question, but I'm not a quantum physicist, so I say, I think if I have it right, it has something to do with gravity, but don't ask me the details, and frankly, it doesn't really matter. Let's just accept it as fact that people who are a lot smarter than I am have proven this, and God bless. You can, in the quantum world, have a cat that is both alive and dead at the same time. You can, and as you said, the uncertainty principle, which I won't get to, it's a different world. And if you think about it, because in a way we do live in the quantum world, we just don't know it, and it doesn't really impact us. We're more Newtonian than quantum. If you change your thinking process and say, okay, on a different level in our world, the impossible is possible. And if I can be in two different places at one time physically in the quantum world, then why not psychologically be in two different places at the same time? Am I crazy and should be institutionalized, or is there something to my incoherent ramblings?
Actually, Bruce, you're on to a lot. For anybody who remembers Star Trek and saying, beam me up.
Mel, I have to stop you. You have to stop touching your computer because your camera is going to make people a little bit uncomfortable.
It'll look like quantum change. So beam me up, Scotty.
Which was never said on Star Trek.
Okay. The concept.
The concept
is quantum entanglement. Quantum entanglement goes back to a great debate that Einstein had with Niels Bohr about reality and how reality operates. And Einstein passed away prior to science being able to settle the debate. And without going into the particulars, the debate was, does cause and effect exist? Is there separate realities, or is everything is one? And Einstein ultimately lost the debate. So counterintuitively, non-rationally, science confirms that in the quantum realm, everything can be as one, and something can, in fact, be entangled, which means it can appear somewhere else at the same time. Now, these experiences of quantum entanglement actually exist on a human level. Let's imagine that there are twins, and I use this example in my book, and she's in San Francisco and her brother is in Paris. She falls in the shower and breaks her ankle. At that moment, he feels pain in his ankle. Now, the cynic would say, well, they have shared DNA, that's why this happened. But they don't need to be twins. Many of us have had these experiences, which are non-rational, cannot be explained by causality. But think about the term non-rational. When rational becomes our God, which means we dismiss anything that isn't rational, we miss the mark. The placebo effect is non-rational. We don't understand how placebo can be as effective as the medication. It doesn't matter. It is, which means we need to expand past the limitations of our rational mind. Love isn't rational. Can you prove it? Can you see it? No. Do you know it to be true from your experience? Yes. Logic and ration should be tools in our toolbox, Bruce. But if they are the only tools, we limit ourselves. So before the microscope was invented, it would be non-rational or rational to believe that there was matter that was so small we couldn't see it. So because our mind can't conceive of something, would be not evidence that it doesn't exist. It's just our mind can't conceive it. And that's the beauty of quantum physics. And by the way, the divide between the quantum world and our world is only a divide that our mind has constructed. Maybe there is no divide.
Probably the most fascinating thing I ever witnessed was when I was on an airplane. A young girl, probably 8, 9, 10 years old, was in excruciating pain. There was a doctor. You had, let's say, for sake of argument, 150 people on the plane. Not one person had a painkiller on them. It was amazing. And everybody was trying to be as helpful as possible. Nobody even had a Valium. There was nothing. And we were making an emergency landing, and this child was in just excruciating agony. The only thing they had was ice, and the doctor goes around, and finally he sees someone has an Altoid. So he takes the Altoid, and he goes over to the little girl, and he looks at everybody and gives us a look that basically says, "Shut up, don't say a word." And you know what's coming. He breaks the Altoid in half. He tells you it's very powerful medicine. It tastes very bad. You can't swallow it. You have to suck on it. So he puts it on her tongue, and she starts to cry because it tastes bad. And within minutes, she's sound asleep. All right. Now, I don't know what happened, appendicitis or something else. But that's when I learned that the placebo effect really does work. I'm going to ask you probably an unfair question to end with. How can you use the placebo effect to overcome the fear of change and get unstuck?
So that's a brilliant question.
Thank you.
Which is medicine and science fails us. Because when there's an anomaly like the placebo effect, they marginalize it. Instead of saying, wow, what do we need to learn? The placebo effect proves that the mind can heal the body, that the mind can soothe the pain. So applying the placebo effect to fear of change, and that dovetails actually with my approach and what I write about in my book, is the placebo effect here about change is simply to believe that your mind and your thoughts can do the same thing that the Altoid did for that little girl. Your mind and your thoughts, number one, are creating the fear. In this case, her physical discomfort or her pain wasn't created by her mind.
No, she was in pain.
But in this case, fear of change, it is your mind and beliefs that have created the pain and the fear. So it's only your mind that can heal it. Therefore, understanding that the fear, in most cases, is constructed by your mind and your thoughts. So if my mind constructed the fear, my mind can release the fear. Now, some may think that sounds easy. Sounds easier said than done, people's thoughts will be. But we have to dive into the work, and they teach you how to do that. You can learn to see your thought and not become your thought. That's what I call thinking. When I think, I see my thought. I don't have to become reactive. I don't have to become fearful. I can say, That's the thought that makes me afraid. I don't have to become that thought. It's thought knocking at the door. I don't need to open the door. And it works.
Mel, I thank you. I regret that we're out of time. Before I let you go, I want to share your contact information, but any final thoughts for our viewers? And I thank you again for having come on.
Certainly. So to your viewers, Bruce, I would say this: get in touch with your thoughts right now. Are your thoughts saying to you, this is implausible, this is too difficult, this is accessible? You can begin your process of change, navigating change right now by asking yourself, what's the last thought that I had and what is it telling me?
Mel, thank you so much for coming on. I'm sure I speak for all of our viewers when I say that you provided a wealth of information.
Thank you, Bruce. It's been a pleasure.
I'm Bruce Hurwitz. Thank you for watching. And as always, please keep focused on success.